On Garde is a swashbuckling action game where you'll be fighting guards and nefarious noblemen in fast-paced fights that are absolutely full of spectacle. You're going to be using the environment, your wit, and of course your blade, and you're going to be teaching them a lesson. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because today is going to be a fantastic video. We are talking about a great game that I definitely think you'll enjoy, and we are also introducing the SWAS meter to my reviews, a brand new way to essentially grade games compared to each other. We're going to be talking about that towards the end of the video. Make sure to stay tuned. First of all, though, with On Garde, who is it for? Well, we're going to go to the Steam Marketplace and we're going to go ahead and take a look at the developer. When you click the link, it takes you to a page of Kepler Interactive. Now, Kepler Interactive has made a few other interesting games like Cat Quest 1, 2, and 3, Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn, which is a game that I talked about before on this channel where I was thoroughly disappointed for it, but they've also made a game called Sifu, which I'm sure everybody has heard of by now, and if I were to draw a comparison between On Garde and another game, I think Sifu is probably the most accurate comparison I could think of. If you're a fan of the fighting style and the art style of Sifu, you're going to absolutely love this game. Granted, there's not roguelike elements to it like there is with Sifu, but it's overall such an enjoyable experience, and it's very comparable. In this review, we're going to be talking about combat as always, voice acting, replayability, and some areas that I definitely think the game could improve. So let's go ahead and let's hop straight into it with the voice acting. The voice acting in this game is fantastically well done. However, it's definitely a bit campy, which really does suit the comedic tone of the game. You could tell that the voices weren't meant to be, gritty, realistic portrayals of historical characters, but more so a fun, interactive environment where you could just, sit back, relax, and enjoy the setting, essentially. There's not really any memorable characters, though. The voice acting was done pretty well across the board, but there wasn't really a standout performance, either good or bad. So that's definitely a good thing, I think. It comes back to the old saying of no news is good news, after all.
If it isn't the City Guard. Or should I say, the Count Duke's private army of goons.
What's all this ruckus? The Count Duke has forbidden dueling within the city walls.
That just means it takes twice as much courage. On guard!
Next up is the combat, of course, an ever-present and ever-important part of a game that is based solely around combat. The combat in On Garde definitely delivers. It is responsive, satisfying, and impactful. Three of the main things that I look for when I'm rating any sort of a combat system. So let's break it down a little bit more and talk about it. So the combat features obviously parries, dodging mechanics, combination attacks, as well as environmental features, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next section. And it does also very much feel skill-based while also promoting accessibility. So when I was first getting into the game, I didn't feel like I was going to have to sit here and grind it for 50 hours just to pick up the skills needed to really excel in the combat offered inside this title. But I could also immediately tell that the way you can chain together parries and dodges and combos and repositioning moves, as well as, again, the environmental solutions, means that there's a huge skill mechanic to it, essentially. So there's a lot of improvement that you can do as a player, and that's especially relevant when it comes to performing inside the arenas, which again we'll be talking about a little bit later down the line as well. Overall, though, combat is enjoyable to experience inside this title. And speaking of environment, let's go ahead and talk about that in its own section, which is not normally something I do. When it comes to the actual set dressing, so clutter being placed, as well as, just regular things about the environment that make you feel immersed in the game, Garde does a very good job of it. There's nothing that really detracts from the experience, and what really makes this game unique is, of course, the environment when it comes to combat solutions. So it definitely offers a whole new level of mechanics and skill that can be uncovered. There's different pillars that you can kick enemies into. There's different, for example, cannons that you can activate by throwing a lantern at them, which is very basic stuff as far as video games go. But there's also things like, for example, throwing pots at your enemies to stun them, throwing barrels, or in some cases, chickens on their head to disorient them and get off some free hits. There's so many different creative solutions for any one different combat encounter inside this game that as you replay through the story or as you're going through the arenas of the game, it gives you some levels of replayability that you can experience by just experimenting with different combinations of both environmental as well as attack-based combat. And lastly, for the positives or the over-review of the game, let's go ahead and talk about the arenas. Essentially, very early on, you do unlock the ability to do these. These are essentially combat-focused mini games that you can think of where you can go through and choose some sort of power-ups to aid your character, while there's also randomized negative effects applied to your character. So this is very much kind of a roguelike game mode that's off to the side apart from the regular story. Now, these are definitely fun, and they are certainly challenging. However, there's not a ton of replayability. Once you beat them at a certain difficulty, you've kind of seen most of what there is to that particular arena. This is, however, a fantastic way for players to practice or progress if they are struggling with the combat inside the base game, if they're stuck on a particularly difficult boss, those sorts of things. So it is definitely nice to have them here. And it is also nice that they included additional content above the regular story, considering that the story to this game is roughly only 4.5 hours long. Obviously, if you're wanting to do completionist side of it, you're going to be looking at probably about 10 hours to get everything done, which still is not a lot of content if this game is priced at full price. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some of the negatives to the game, because almost every game in existence is going to have a few of them. So first of all is going to be the enemy variety. The enemy roster in this game definitely does start to feel stale over time. As you progress throughout the game, there are, of course, new enemies introduced, but definitely not a high amount of them, and the new enemies introduced are challenging off the start until you figure out their counter, essentially, at which point, you can very easily defeat them, even in fairly large groups. So I do wish that there was a bit more enemy diversity, or the enemies were essentially a bit more difficult to counter, because a lot of the fights does come down to using some sort of environmental barrier. So for example, there's these bombardiers who will throw grenades at you and then run away, and you essentially have to counter them by throwing something at them to stun them. But it's a very simple fight apart from that. And a lot of the enemies can actually start to feel like hit sponges, unfortunately, later on into the game, because there's not really a way to upgrade how much damage that you do. So even late game enemies who can counter you and do, unblockable attacks and all those sorts of things are eating just a lot more hits, and essentially the game just prolongs combat instead of adding, diversification of the enemy types. The short length of the game definitely left me wanting more, and this time in a bad way. In my last game review, I talked about Blasphemous and how it desperately left me wanting more, but in a very good way. This game, on the other hand, the story just kind of felt like it was a very back burner experience to it. There's 4 episodes of the main story that you play through, so it is incredibly short, and you can definitely beat it quite easily in one sitting, if it's, your day off or something like that, right? But I do wish the story was longer, and I won't spoil anything, but the ending of the story definitely felt a little underwhelming in my opinion. There wasn't really any sort of, unpredictable twists or anything like that. It just kind of ended, unfortunately. More levels obviously would be nice, maybe another entire episode if this game were to get some support after release, and they gave us more, just options in terms of even DLC that you could purchase for a small fee and get additional story content. That would be absolutely surprising, because as it stands right now, there's just not much depth to it. It's very simple, and it lacks twists, and you can kind of, tell what's coming essentially. And then obviously the post-game content is definitely a little bit lacking. So in a lot of games that we see, even indie games, once you finish the game, you can kind of run around the world and you can go anywhere you want, and there's still going to be a lot of, collectibles that you can get. There's still going to be a lot of, secret areas that you might be able to unlock, new enemies that you could fight, different endings that you could try to go for, just overall world exploration, all those sorts of good things. That's not really present in On Guard, so unfortunately, once you finish the game, you're pretty much playing the arenas, or you're uninstalling the game, which is definitely a little bit disappointing. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the rating for the game, or as I mentioned, the brand new SWAS meter that I am unveiling. What is it, you may ask? Well, you might think that it stands for sweaty ass, which you would actually be incorrect in this case. So the S is going to stand for story, the W stands for world, A stands for action, S for sound, and S for style. So obviously the story, we're going to be talking about how well written the story is, as well as engaging. The world, so how immersive and well designed is it? Action, so how responsive, how fluid, how enjoyable is the gameplay? Sound, so how good is the music, the voice acting, the overall sound design? And finally, style, how visually appealing is the game? Is it unique? Is it just kind of, run-of-the-mill average, something you see every year like Call of Duty? And we're going to be giving them all a score out of 10. So first of all, we have story. The story for this one, I gave a 4 out of 10. As I talked about, it's not very well written. There's not much to it, and it's just not very interesting at the end of the day. We have world, of course. How immersive is the world? I gave this a 6 out of 10. The world is very well designed, but there's not really too much that's, special or really intriguing about it. We have the action, so how responsive, fluid, and enjoyable is the gameplay? I think this deserves a 9 out of 10 in all honesty. It is very, very well done. We have the first S, which is sound, or second S, I guess, rather, which, how good is the music, voice acting, sound design, all that sort of good stuff, right? This S gets a 9 out of 10 in my opinion. Very well done in terms of sound design. It was very enjoyable to listen to. The music is absolutely fantastic, as you can hear from the background of this video. The music used is the official soundtrack for the game. And finally, the last S is going to be style. So how visually appealing is the game? Is it unique? All that sort of good stuff. This I gave an absolute 10 out of 10. I think the game has a unique art style, and I think it is a very visually appealing art style as well. It's definitely a joy to look at, and it doesn't hurt the eyes like a lot of titles that are being released these days. Overall, that's going to bring this game to a 7.6 out of 10. I would personally not recommend purchasing it for full price. I was lucky enough to get my copy for free through Twitch Prime, and they give out games like every week there. And I'm not sponsored, by the way, not yet at least, so don't feel pressured to do that. But if you see it go on sale, like it is currently on Steam, or if you see it go on sale on Epic or GOG, I definitely recommend picking it up on that sale. Full price, wouldn't recommend it. If it's a sale, it's a very good purchase. That being said, thank you guys all so much for watching until the end, and I'll see you next time.